Hello everyone. On this video we will be looking at second derivatives and third derivatives. Okay, so if you understand how to find the derivative, then finding the second and third derivative shouldn't really be too bad. Okay, so the second derivative, well, first we'll go with first derivative. First derivative is equal to the same notation. So f prime of x is equal to derivative of f with respect to x, which is equal to the derivative with respect to x of whatever your function is. Alright? So these are what we call our first derivative. Your second derivative is literally just another notch by your function. Okay. And the notation looks like that. Or you can also notate it as, or denote it as, the derivative of your first derivative. Okay, so this is your second derivative. Yep. Here we go. And your third derivative, of course, is the same thing. It just keeps on going and going and going. So you have the third derivative. Clean that up a little bit because it should be 3 notches. Okay, there we go. Uh-oh, let's big square x to the third. Which is also the derivative with respect to x of your second derivative. Okay, and it just keeps on going from there. Okay, so let's look at a few examples of finding the second derivative. Okay, let's say if we want to find the second derivative of f of x equals x to the 4th power. Alright, so first thing you do is you find your first derivative. Let me write down the actual step. So first, find your first derivative, f prime of x. Okay, so we know if f of x is x to the 4th, f of x equals x to the 4th, so that means f prime of x, bring down that exponent, and subtract 1. So it means f prime of x is equal to 4x to the 3rd. Okay. Underline that since we're going to need it. Okay, so to find your second derivative, I'll put that down here. Okay, all that is the derivative of your first derivative. Okay, so that's just the derivative of 4x to the 3rd power. Okay, so that means your second derivative is just the derivative of 4x to the 3rd. So Using that, it's just 4 times 3x to the 3 minus 1. Okay, so our second derivative, 4 times 3, which is 12. X to the 3 minus 1 power is just x squared. Okay, so that's your second derivative. Like I said, pretty straightforward. No rules are changing. You're doing the exact same thing you would do to find the first derivative. You're just applying it to the derivative. All right. So if you are still writing, feel free to press pause. But we're going to go ahead and move on to our next example. All right. So let's say, for example, I want to find the second derivative of, let's say, f of x equals x to the 8th power. All right, so what I want you to do is I want you to go ahead and press pause and solve this one on your own. All right, so I'm assuming you've already pressed pause and worked this one out. So let's go ahead and verify your answer. The first thing you do, find your first derivative. F of x is x to the 8th power, so we bring down that exponent. So you have 8x, and then we subtract 1 to the 8 minus 1. So that means your first derivative is equal to 8x to the 7th power. Okay, so now we just apply the derivative to that again. So if you wanted to, you can just go right ahead and just bring down the 7. So your second derivative is equal to 8 times the derivative of x to the 7th power. So you bring down the 7, 7x to the 7 minus 1 power. Okay, so that gives you a second derivative of 56x to the 6th power. Alright, so let's go ahead and move on to our next example. Still have plenty of room on this page, so you don't have to press pause if you're still writing. Okay, so what if we evaluate the second derivative at x equals 2 when the function g of x is equal to 5x to the negative 2 power is given. Alright, so let's go ahead and solve this one. Okay, so remember the first thing you want to do is find your first derivative. Okay, so that's 5 times the derivative of x to the negative 2 power, so we bring down our negative 2. And we subtract 1. Okay, so that lets us know that our first derivative, 5 times negative 2 is negative 10, times x to the negative 3 power. Alright, so now we go ahead and find our second derivative. Your second derivative is equal to the derivative of your first derivative. Alright, so second derivative is equal to, bring down, well, Put the negative 10 there first. Bring down our negative 3. And subtract 1. So our second derivative is equal to positive 30. Once you multiply your negative 10 and negative 3 to the x to the negative 4 power. Or if you wanted to, you could rewrite it as 30 over x to the 4th power. Since x to the negative 4 is just 1 over x to the 4th. Alright, you put a little square on that one. Even though that's not our final answer, we're still working. Alright, so when x is equal to 2, that will give us our second derivative at that point. So second derivative at 2 is equal to, using this one, 30 over 2 to the 4th power, which is 30 over 16, which if we simplify is 15 over 8. Okay, so that's our final answer. Alright, so if you're still writing, feel free to press pause, but we're going to go ahead and move on to our next example. Alright, so what if you want to evaluate the second derivative at x equals negative 2 when f of x is equal to 3x to the 5th power. Alright, so what I want you to do is press pause, and I want you to go ahead and solve this one on your own. Find the second derivative at that point. Alright, so I'm assuming you've pressed pause and you're all done. So we're going to go ahead and verify your answer. Okay, so first thing you want to do, you find your first derivative. So your first derivative is 3 times the derivative of x to the 5th, so we bring down the 5 and subtract 1 from that exponent. So your first derivative, 3 times 5 is 15, x to the 4th power. Okay, so now, using that, we go ahead and find our second derivative. Remember, that's just the derivative of your first derivative. Okay, so that's just, make sure that's back on the screen. Your second derivative is equal to 15, derivative of x to the 4th, which is 4x to the 4 minus 1 power. So that means our second derivative, 15 times 4 is 60, times x to the 3rd power. Yep, there we go. So now to find it at x equals 2, well, negative 2, when x equals negative 2, it's equal to, remember we're using this one, so I'll put a little light square on it, equals 60 times negative 2 to the 3rd power, which is equal to negative 480 as your final answer. Okay, so as you can see, second derivatives aren't that hard if you understand how to get first derivatives. Okay, but what if we wanted to find the third derivative? of f of x equals 3x to the fifth power. Okay? And really, you do the same thing. Just to write it kind of in order, f of x equals 3x to the fifth power. F prime of x we figured out already up here. It's 15x to the fourth. Okay, our second derivative we figured out already is 60x to the third power. So to find our third derivative, it's the exact same thing. Our third derivative, I'm just going to do that over here, is just the derivative of our second derivative. Okay, so that's going to equal the derivative of 60x to the third power, which is equal to, if we bring down the 3, 60 times 3x to the 3 minus 1 power, or it's equal to 180x squared. Okay, so our third derivative is equal to 180x squared. And that would be your final answer. Alright, so hopefully this made sense, and I'll see you on the next video.